Today is December 13th, 2023, and it's coming up on about 10:30 in the morning, and I've been sitting here with my tent window open for about 3 hours now, and as you can see behind me, it's very still. Check it out. I saw one thing in the pre-dawn hours. I think it was a rabbit. I think it was a cottontail, but it was hard to tell because it was pre-dawn. The main knowledge I want to share with you is that I've had this tent window open for some time now, and you can listen and you're more likely to hear the sound of a passing car than a passing bird. I guess the main reason I'm mentioning these things all together is because I started to wonder just how many of us have products that are just going to disuse, and yet we buy more products. And here we are coming upon a season of what's usually considered a season of sharing, season of giving, and it gets a little bit concerning for me because we have these quiet, almost dreadfully quiet areas in nature where we should be able to hear a considerable amount of activity. And that's not to say that there is no life here. What I'm saying is hardly anybody recognizes that if you were here just 5 years ago, you probably wouldn't leave your tent open for the same amount of time without ever having seen at least one bug or heard a dozen birds, And it's hard to know what we don't know. And so for the purpose of this video, for my friends and family back home who are wondering, why would you want to go to this place for so long and spend your birthday and the holidays and the celebration of Christ, Christmas, alone? And the thing is, none of us are alone, and almost all of us can feel the presence of one another at all times. The only time when things become a little bit disconcerting is when we start to see the life flicker. Listen for what I mostly hear now. Did you hear that? Look. Bonus. You hear the bird? So 2 cars and a bird. The signs of life are there. There's no doubt about it. But also, on my long walks, especially with a recent brother, who I met here, the signs of death are few and far between. And so now we have to consider, if I'm not finding the same volume of bones in the desert when I walk through it, and if I'm seeing what seems to be a lapse in the abundance that has always been in this desert, even during lean times of the past, then why are we celebrating by giving new things that are being created just because we have such fleeting desires? And here, listen. I don't know if you could hear that, but you didn't hear any other birds during this time when the car drove by. That bird that we heard was calling out, probably trying to find another bird of a feather so they could flock together. And for whatever reason, there was no response. So here I am, chattering away and trying to see if I can garner any kind of a response. Not for selfish purposes, but perhaps for the purpose of basic survival. Listen. You may not be able to hear that one, but that was maybe you can hear it now. Here. The first night that I got here, there was a large group in a campground, a group campsite, and all they did for the entire duration of nightfall, just like the other night when I was in the basin, was basically party, being disrespectful to everything that was around them. And by everything, I mean people, animals. And the reason I started this story and just gave you some basic details, I'm going to tie in the nature right now. And this is the reason that I want to tell you this. This is one of the few campgrounds where you can come and hear owls pretty much throughout the entirety of nightfall. And when I first got here on the first night, the owls were here. And they started out here. They were calling to each other, and then basically the group of who I'll just reference as bullies for the purpose of garnering conversation. The group of bullies were making such a racket, such an amount of noise, and you hear another car going by possibly, that the owls flew away. And they normally stay here throughout the daytime. They like to stay here because if you can imagine life and the things that humans draw, like, mice, variety of rodents, then you can imagine that the owls definitely have a friendly source of potential meals for their own offspring. Anyway, the owls did return the following morning after this group of bullies continued to have made noise throughout the night and finally went to sleep. The owls came back and they were here in the pre-dawn hours, just like what I described with the rabbit that was out here in the pre-dawn hours. They were here, but unlike the rabbit, they were calling to each other again. And you could hear them, but only if you hear the bird. I hope you do. So just like that, I know that I can't see the bird right now. I'm not looking in its direction and it hasn't caught my eye, but I can hear it. And in the same way that I'm telling this story, I could hear the owls as I was laying here peacefully. And then one of the bullies woke up and woke up all the rest of the bullies. And the bullies began doing the same exact thing in the pre-dawn hours. Listen to the car, almost like an idiosyncranicity. What a coincidence, huh? And another car is starting up in the campground, and a thing is slamming. I don't know if you hear these things, but all these bullies woke up and they started doing the same thing, just absolutely blurting out everything as loudly as they could, laughing like as if they wanted to outdo the other one's laughter. And the owls left. Now, for the next 2 nights, I haven't heard the owls. They didn't come back. Probably because they were so disturbed by those instances of what sounded like maybe new, what would you call it? Inhabitants had taken up residence, and they were bullies. And so the owls didn't want to return because they weren't able to hear their quarry. And the interesting thing, the other ironic twist to this story about the bullies that I want to tell you, is that on that first night when I was here, when they were carrying on all the way late into well past nightfall, both unnaturally lighting the landscape and flashing flashlights at everybody else around, while laughing and walking through the entire campgrounds, laughing as loudly and shrilly as possible. When they went back and had their dinner at their campsite, which consisted of hot dogs, I also found out stories about their relationships and other people's relationships and all kinds of gossip. But they also screamed loudly because at least one mouse had found its way into their campgrounds. Little did they know that they drove away the thing that would have probably enjoyed taking care of the thing that caused them this irrational fear. You know, the mouse itself is not really a danger to our livelihood. It's maybe it's an array of complex situations to where a mouse would even be something dangerous to us as people. The mouse has a role, just as much as the owl has a role, just as much as we each have a role to at least consider being stewards of the lands that we're traveling within, even if it's just our own household, and to understand that in lean times, there are a lot of bullies who are irrationally drinking it all up, eating it all up, laughing it all up, and never once considering the fact that we should really sit still during these seasons of sharing, during these seasons of giving thanks, during this season of celebration. Because what we're celebrating during this month, hardly any of us even discuss in a way that allows us to consider that maybe all of us are made up of the same matter, and maybe it matters considerably that you hear and see that I've left my tent window open for this whole time. And you saw what bugs me. The fact is, there are a lot less bugs in our wild spaces than maybe there should be. And I'm not saying that they're just not there at all and that we're doomed. What I'm saying is that there should be an indicator. There should be someone who can find a way to communicate this absolutely true. We have one bug. Look, can you see it? So as if on cue, we have one insect that I don't even know if you could see because it's so small. And in a lot of ways, I think of that bug as it's God. You're part of a creation from a higher power, whether it's your parents, however your ancestry, whatever you give regard for. The only way you can't give regard for something and you have absolute vitriol towards the concept of spirituality might be if you just don't have any gratitude to begin with, any joy, any spark of compassion. But as toddlers, I guarantee you that if I was just to crawl to you and you were to crawl to me and we were to look up and see each other, like really see each other, just toddlers, go, oh, wow. Toddlers will even look into the mirror and smile because we identify with ourselves. It's joyful to see one another. And so for the purpose of this holiday season, the reason that I didn't want to, quote unquote, see one another, listen. I see you everywhere I happen to be. Do you see everyone and everything in everyone and everything you look at? Perhaps that's what Jesus was describing when he said, take this and eat from it. This is my body. Take this and drink from it. This is my blood. All he was suggesting is everything that we consume, including time with one another, can be taken with reverence, but only if we have regard. And maybe it does start with us, with ourselves. Let it begin with me. Maybe it does begin with ourselves. And to break any kind of an old habit, first we have to recognize something. For this holiday season, coming up on a time of resolutions, maybe we can start early and avoid all of the gimmicky, entertainment, value-based, passive ways of regarding one another. And maybe instead we can consider just how interesting life might be if we have a lot of missing insects, like the bee, and a lot of missing vegetation, like produce, and a lot of missing values. Imagine that type of a life can be avoided altogether if we just learn to communicate with one another once again. Till next time, peace, love, and all that old school stuff.